Please give a warm welcome to writer-director A.V. Rockwell. Thanks for being here, A.V.
Thank you for having me.
When I introduced the film, I told them that to keep an eye out for the three time periods in the film. And my question to you is about the amount of care and thought that went behind creating those three different time periods. I told you I saw it a couple of times now, and the cinematography, the changes from the different time periods. Can you tell us about how you went about creating those three worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a few different lenses that I tried to map out this shift in New York. I think holistically, I was thinking about just visually, how did the city change? And to me, it went from this gritty place that on the surface was very rough and tough and undesirable. But it was a city that had so much vitality and was ironically so welcoming to everyone. And so it's like establishing that up front, establishing the more iconic backdrop of New York, just in terms of that older architecture that was actually very colorful and full of life. And that it's that grid that made New York City, New York City. So establishing that up front, and then over the arc of time, you see how the city cleans up. But you also see how it sterilizes. You see how at the turn of the new century, we lose a lot of those mom and pop stores. And again, just like a city that creates space for everyone, including business owners. And now it's glass, it's steel, it's a lot more anti-social in design. And then it's a lot more chain stores. It's just a lot more quiet. Gentrification is very quiet and quite boring by comparison. So I think visually that's what I was thinking about. I think within the time jumps, I was also thinking about what was happening during each of these eras, not only based off of my lived experience, but also just like doing the research and just seeing like what was happening. Like I was a child during so much of this, and so there was things that I felt, but I was like, what was on paper happening in New York City? And these time periods were very pivotal. 94 is when Giuliani becomes mayor, and it was a very pivotal time for change. And you see what his vision is for the city at the beginning of the film. But by 2001, which is the end of his time in office, you see how all those changes are manifested. And even though the changes are supposed to benefit everyone in the city and make it a more welcoming, safe city for everyone, it became less safer and less welcoming for minorities. And we see that even down to the specifics of Terry, who's a preteen at time, but still is vulnerable to stop and frisk, which is a Giuliani policy, even though it was popularized more aggressively by Bloomberg. So that happens in 2001. And then from 2001, there's a shift of the guard, and we go to Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, again, with the vision that he had for New York, which is really just, if Giuliani just kind of like, paved the ground, he just kind of like locked down that layer of cement of like a new city. And so you see that change take shape as well. And you see him talk about celebrating the vitality of neighborhoods like Harlem, but in the way that he tries to re-energize them, you're actually erasing what makes a neighborhood like Harlem very specific, which we feel that shift by the end of 2005. And all along the way, all these different policies, they all set the stage for what becomes the biggest challenges for Terry and Inez, just trying to stay in the stable home that they fought so hard for. It's like, I think gentrification isn't just a matter of like a few new businesses or a few new neighbors. They're all the way all these things play onto each other. Yes, like what does it matter about police brutality and stop and frisk and all this? Like all of those things are getting rid of people so that you can make way for others. Getting rid of these businesses so that you can make way for new people to come in. So you're not really you're not designing a city in a way that's meant for the current inhabitants. inhabitants, at least these marginalized groups as you see in the film. So those are amongst all the things that I was trying to consider both historically and cinematically in terms of just giving people the landscape of what this time was.
And when in the development of the script did you realize that, you know, the backdrop of the city, the history of the city, and it reflects onto the character itself? And you know, we see her evolution, and we see also the landscape changing as well.
You know, I thought that would be really fun. As I was writing Inez, I was thinking about this story, which always has meant two things to me. It was a story of coming of age in a city and seeing a change and seeing how that impacted some of its citizens that identified like myself. But then I was also thinking about coming of age in a city as a young Black woman in the inner city of New York. And when I was really breaking down what that experience was, I was like, you know, to me, I felt like Inez was New York personified, and I was like, what if the spirit of New York City is a Black woman, you know? And so I think so much of the way the city is reinvented over time, you do see that in Inez as well. She's reinvented in all of these stages, and just like the city starts to lose its sense of self and lose in many ways what makes it so unique and special. Inez kind of goes through that as well in a number of ways. She's trying to be a lot more of what everybody wants her to be, everybody in society, everybody within her family, you know, those are closest to her in many ways. And you see the price of that. And I think New York has kind of gone through a similar thing where in trying to be more palatable and accessible, in many ways it has lost a lot of the richness of its character as a very unique and powerful city.
You go against the grain cinematically of what we're used to seeing, that, you know, love letters to New York from Martin Scorsese, from Woody Allen and others, and also the fact that we have never, I mean, I can't recall seeing a Black woman story in New York City and her world. You know, can you tell us about, you know, breaking new ground with those two aspects?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I do love New York, but I think as a native New Yorker, I have the right to say that that is a complicated love. And I think in the ways that I felt, you know, inspired to tell this story, I was like, New York is a part of my DNA. You hear it in my accent. You hear it, like, it's been so much a part of me as not only a human being, but also as a creative artist. And how do I feel about the fact that this city that I've known and loved may have never loved me? You know, and I think that was so much in part of the writing of this. And so I think it was more of like a heartbreak letter than a love letter. And I, you know, I felt like it just needed to be said. And so now my, you know, I'll see what New York has to say back. But that's what I needed to get out there. And then there was what was the second part?
About a Black woman in New York City and her story that, you know.
Yeah, you know, I think also I really wanted to tell a story that not only acknowledged the experiences of, you know, Black women in society that are made to feel so invisible and misunderstood, but even within our own communities, especially inner city Black women, you know, all they see is a woman like Inez. She's in survival mode for her entire life, and I think when she's walking down the street, when she's on the train, people only see the very superficial, like the more topical layers of that, and instead of trying to change the systems at play that create, you know, this woman and create all the ways in which how she navigates the world is a cry out for help. They just try to pacify her, pacify us. Like, why are you so angry? Oh, if you would just be this way, if you would just be that, you know, maybe society would be a little bit more welcoming to you, you know? And so I think I really wanted to tell a story that honored these women with a sense of empathy and gave people a window into their worlds. I also think that even when we go back to what the early 90s was, and there was so much movies, there was a lot of movies at the time that classic Black movies that also gave a window into this experience in these communities. A lot of the female side characters, they were presented in a way that they were kind of like, how do I put it, like, if I can just deal with you, if I can just deal with like how complicated you are, then I can. It's like I don't know. I'm not finding the right words right now, but they always made it seem like dealing with the challenges or the difficulty of a black woman was something that if you can just overcome it, then yes, I can have a mother figure. If I can just overcome the way you're like difficult or challenging, then I'll have like the girlfriend that I need. It was like, but it was never really. They were never really portrayed in a way that was understanding. It was always this problematic character that if I can just deal with the issues that I hate about you, then I can have what I need. Yeah, so I just didn't like how they were represented in a lot of those movies. And when the men were so humanized and you fully got to see their experience.
Which leads me to the next question about how complex this character is. I mean, she's volatile, she's unpredictable, but at the same time deeply caring. Tell us about constructing her and developing her. It's one of the most fascinating portrayals I've seen.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, I think she was, in some ways, she was a combination of different people, different women in my life that I've come across in life. But I think I was also just trying to think about a character that would just be fun to see on screen, fun for someone to play, just to get into that world of a human being. And so I think I was very thoughtful in trying to just create these layers and these complications, not only that spoke to what I was after and trying to honor this type of woman, but I just felt like, I haven't seen this, so I feel like this would just be, pulling this out would be a fun challenge. And I think, I think it was fun also working with Tiana and just like really shaping all those layers. Like I knew there was a lot of colors to these characters and there was a lot of, who she is in different situations. And so I think really trying to work on her performance and craft her performance in a way that you felt all of that, in a way that like worked in a symphony together.
Was there ever any concern about people sympathizing with her, going with her on the ride? I mean, she does all these wrong things, but she does it for the right reason. That aspect, I mean,
was I worried that people wouldn't
sympathize with her and understand her?
For sure. I think that was a worry for a long time, both when I was writing the screenplay and really just even in finishing the film. I just I think for a very long time as we were like shaping the movie, I just didn't know if people were really going to see Inez. So I think it's been really I guess I'm really grateful, because now that people are starting to see the film, I know they're not just seeing Terry, they're seeing her. So I feel like, okay, I didn't fail my character.
And finding Tiana, I mean, it's such a complex performance and it's such a complex role, and she knocks it out of the park. How did it come about trusting that she had it in her to do justice to Inez?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a leap of faith with any project, just in me casting Tiana and also her having faith in me as her director. I think in the way that I found her, I knew that for this type of role, it required an actress who had the talent and depth to take on this type of character. But I also knew that it needed to be truthful to me. Like, I think I needed to feel like she knows this woman, or she's been this woman, or this woman's in her family. Like, there has to be some kind of connective tissue for her that made it a really truthful performance. And again, like, Inez isn't every type of woman. She's not even every type of black woman. She comes from a very specific experience. And so I needed to know that she was going to connect within her in a way with this character, in a way that she wasn't looking down at her. She was really there, connected with her, and it wasn't performative.
There is so much in your film, so many details that are shown to us, but you don't explain, and adds to the richness of this film. For example, they carry this trash bag with them, and you never explain to us why are they carrying this trash bag around. But then I sort of imagine that they come from foster care, so they gotta be used to carrying things. And like that's just a little example of the details that you give us. Tell us about, you know, developing that.
Yeah, I think so. A detail like that came from the research that I did. In that case, that was a very specific. Like I was talking like a social worker, and I just wanted to make sure if I'm going to tell this story, I get it. Like I'm really doing the work to make sure I'm getting it right, and honoring people's experience. I don't want to tell a story about foster care in a way that, isn't shining a light on what that experience is, and the best ways that I can. And that trash bag, I think for a lot of kids that are traveling through the foster care system, especially if you're going home from home, a lot of kids, everything that they own is in that bag, is in that trash bag, And so Terry, around the time that the story begins, he lands in the hospital and he's gonna get moved to a different place. Like, whatever circumstances, I mean, that, it is described in the film, like if he's not in the best home for him, they're gonna move him on. So yeah, that trash bag is gonna go with him to the next home. And Inez would have also came for foster care, so she would have been very familiar with that as well. And so I think in the way that it's established as his bag in the beginning, and then she has her bag, and then it kind of reverse. Now she's a traveler again at the end of the film. It was really just nodding to that so much of this movie is about a sense of home. And these were two people, when you first meet them, they are dying for a sense of home and a sense of stability. And so when I think of gentrification and who gets impacted the most, like, that's a reflection of. It's like, just how devastating is, imagine fighting your whole life just for a sense of stability, not only to have that home that they create for each other, but even when you see the beautiful moments in their relationship, just the space to be loving and the space to read to your kid and just have like joy and all of those type of things that comes from having that. And when people are displaced, to make way for like, all these things that are not serving them at all. It's like that's what's lost. Everything that they fought for is puts them back in that trash bag mode.
Tell us about the decision of casting 3 Terrys. And I mean, I know Moonlight paved the way, but it still must have been a challenge for you to create 3 different Terrys.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was really more practical. Like, I think in what we talked about earlier, like why I created the time jumps the way that I did, is like, okay, if I know that it's important to use these time periods in particular to shape the arc of the film, there was this debate about should it be 2 Terrys or 3, and I think, and I knew that would probably be a reference point, with Moonlight, and obviously Barry's an amazing filmmaker. I think for me it was just like, if I have Josiah playing 13-year-old and all the other actors who is the age playing 13-year-olds, it wouldn't have resonated as well as seeing a bunch of like true teenagers, during that age. Like, it would have just been weird. I think it didn't make sense. And Josiah, he's playing a 17-year-old, but he's also like 23 in real life, or he was. So it would have just been weird and probably not as impactful. Even again, like Terry's technically a preteen, which some of the kids in real life were preteens that were stopped and frisked when that policy was still active. And I know they're trying to bring it back in New York. And so seeing him in a much more mature, physique and presentation, it just certain aspects of trying to tell a story of a bike of a preteen wouldn't have resonated. And also seeing Aaron as a preteen probably wouldn't have resonated. So yeah, it was just practical. It just made sense to just build the character.
Plus,
with
it
3.
separates them. It's like we're in 3 different
three different eras. Yeah.
I think we alluded to it, but I'd love to hear you talk about it. The fact that when we start in the film it's warm colors, and then as the movie progressed, I mean, I was struck watching the last scene again that they're wearing just dark colors, and everything, the color has been taken out from the film. Tell us about that gradation.
Yeah, I think that goes back to just, shaping the arc of how we experience not only what's happening with New York, but also what's happening with the characters. I think New York, as it starts to lose its sense of self and its vitality, and it's, I don't know, it's just, I mean, I grew up in a very fun city, I'm sure in many ways when you were growing up there too. It's just, it has so much life and personality, and I think as that continues to get washed away. It's just, it's interesting, even when you look at like photography at the turn of the century, between like New York has all this generations of photography that's all on film, and it's all very stunning, and it's iconic. And then around the 90s and 2000s, first of all, there's less street photography, and it all goes digital, and it's just a lot more harsh and a lot less character-ish. And I think all of those things, just the way the city has been sanitized, you feel that by pulling out the colors and reflecting a lot of what the new colors are. But I think also what's happening with Terry and Inez, they spend the first half of the movie really falling in love with each other. And building their bond, and in the second half we see it falling apart. And I think just the mood of the film not only reflects how the city's energy is changing and how that is gonna impact their life and how they move through their life, but also what's happening emotionally with them, the way that changes. I think the colors was really just in honor of that.
And I was talking to you outside that even in your costume design, what Tiana wears at the beginning, she's wearing this bold outfit that mirror her fierceness, and then as the movie progresses, she becomes almost sedated in the way what she's wearing and her hair, everything. That took a lot. Kudos to you for the detail, the commitment to the nuances. It's a pretty remarkable film. Tell us about the score. The score is terrific, and also the music in each period is dramatically different.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the original score, which is by Gary Gunn, we were very intentional. I think for me, I wanted it to be a combination of something that had the classical sound, and I'm thinking okay, New York is an iconic city, so I want something that kind of nods to it in that way, but also soulful. I think this is a soulful part of New York City. There's so many worlds in New York, and so I'm okay, if you can bring those elements, bring what's both classical and interject with some soulful energy into that. I think that was really important to the tone of the score overall, and rhythmic. And also honoring Harlem, specifically within New York. And then I think honoring Inez, I think, for instance, just that opening music alone, I was it's so important to me that this isn't seen as a Debbie Downer story or just a rough and tough, shoot 'em up movie. It's not, it's not that at all, but I think sometimes people feel you can only see certain things in a certain way. And I was no, I want this woman, if she's watching this movie, to feel her heroism celebrated. I want her to feel her sense of dignity is being celebrated, that she feels loved, even though she's in Rikers because she had a tougher way of life, and now she's going out and she's trying to make it happen for herself, make it happen for her kid. I think this movie was for women that feel just so low and so so rejected by society, and I wanted them to see the film and feel celebrated. And so I think Gary's score was so integral to that, making sure that the tone was set the right way in terms of how people experienced her, and how this woman experienced herself watching the movie. And then the soundtrack changes over the eras. I think, again, just trying to tell the story of a specific neighborhood. Harlem is such a neighborhood that's rich in music. You can just walk from one corner of a block to another, and you experience 40 years of black music, because you have the older people outside and they're playing their old tunes. Somebody's car is passing by, they're playing what's on the radio right now. A restaurant is playing something. There's just music everywhere. And so I think I wanted to celebrate music in that regard, how it's experienced in a neighborhood that actually is a neighborhood. This is a film about community. and what happens when commerce is put over community, a sense of community with, in terms of a city's priority. So I wanted to celebrate that, and I think this movie is also about generational cycles, the things that we experience within our community, within the Black community. And I think our music, you feel that. You feel the patterns. You feel the common threads between generations. And samples is something that is acknowledged. Terry and Lucky have a conversation about that specifically. But I do think that generations of Black people do talk to each other through music, and you feel that through the sampling. But not only do you feel the cycles of like each generation having new obstacles that we have to overcome, but you also feel progress. And I think that was really important with this film too, feeling like, okay, even if we always have some new obstacle to overcome, in this case, Inez's generation, which would have came up with the drug epidemic, now Cherry's generation is dealing with gentrification in a way that's uprooting people, but there's still progress. We're still somehow moving ahead. At the end of the day, we're not back in the, segregated times. We're not still like, they're even though there's new obstacles, we're still somehow making it forward. And you see that within, what Terry's able to have versus what Inez had growing up. And so I think I just wanted the movie to feel hopeful and optimistic. And that's something that we should be proud of, that no matter what, we still are, even if it feels slow, we are moving ahead.
Last question is the fact that you're dealing with it's really strong themes and messages, but the movie's incredibly entertaining, and on the surface we can enjoy the film without having to stop and think about all the socioeconomic changes and stuff. Was that something that you were conscious about balancing, the messaging, but at the same time, keeping us entertained? I hate using that term, but
yeah, no, I think that's the priority. At the end of the day, it's a movie, and it is entertainment first and foremost. So I'd like to hope that people did enjoy it. That was certainly my intentions. I was not trying to make it a miserable morning for you.
I still cannot believe it's your first film. It's remarkable. Yeah, and thank you so much for being here, A.B. Can't wait to see the next film.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, Roger. This has been a pleasure, and thank you so much, everyone, for just coming to check out the film. I hope you enjoyed it. As we said, I hope it was entertaining.
Terrific.
And also just sitting here and letting us, listening to us speak about it. So I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you.